Hello, and welcome to another episode of My Counselor Online. Hey, if you have ever had the thought that your spouse kind of feels like more of a roommate, then I'm going to need you to stick around and pay attention to today's episode. My name is Matthew, and I'm thrilled to be hosting today's episode. And joining me today is one of our featured counselors here at My Counselor Online, Danielle Schaefer. Danielle, how are you today?
I am doing so well, and I am excited to be here for this.
Well, we're excited to hear what you have to say. But before we get into the article, would you just introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who Danielle Schaefer is.
Of course. So I am Danielle. I currently live in Ohio with my husband and our two girls. And so they keep our lives very nice and busy. I have been in the counseling field for quite a few years now, and started off in a school where I got to work with teens and their families, which was very exciting. And now working for MCO, primarily I work with couples, but also some teens and some individuals here and there.
Perfect. Sounds great. So I want us to get into an article that you recently wrote. And the title is How to Revitalize Connection in a Roommate Marriage. And this is part one, right? Part one is talking about the emotional connection. So Danielle, what inspired you to write this article?
Yes, well, the short answer would be my clients. Like I said, I primarily work with couples, and the vast majority of the couples I see come in and they kind of have these experiences in their relationships, right? They all use different words, but oftentimes the word roommate is tossed out, right? We don't feel like husband and wife anymore, right? Sometimes that friendship is still solidly there. Sometimes it's not, though. Sometimes it's described as a business partnership, or we just don't know how to connect anymore. And so this article was birthed out of a desire to just be helpful to the people that I see every day.
Yeah, and you've kind of you're touching on in this next question, but who specifically is this article written for?
Yes, you're right. I did touch on that just a little bit already.
That's right.
But really, if you are an individual in a relationship or a couple who's just experiencing that sense of, I don't know how to connect with my partner anymore. I don't know when we lost it, or I do know exactly when we lost it, but it doesn't feel like it's there anymore, right? I don't feel like we can just talk. And when we do talk, it feels like it's more about schedules, or we always get into these arguments, and it just prevents us from really emotionally connecting. That is who this article would be written for.
Yeah. So, before we dive into it, like, is that God's design for a marriage to be in that roommate status?
Well, it would be interesting if I said yes, but no, right?
Right. Yeah,
And
exactly.
one reason it is a problem is people are coming in because it just doesn't settle well,
Hmm.
right? When you're in it, it feels miserable and lonely. And I think that is
Right.
that God-given sense of, no, we should feel like one, right? We're
Mhm.
created to be connected so deeply to a partner. And so when that's off and that like shut down, cut off, disconnected feeling is there, we have that
Mhm.
sense like this is not the way it is supposed to be at all.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. So let's talk about some of the things you mentioned in your article. You discuss how brain chemistry changes over the course of a relationship. Can you explain that a little bit to those who are watching or listening to today's episode?
Yeah. And I do want to stay pretty general with this because when you
Hmm.
get into the nitty gritty, it's super exciting, but it's also probably to a point of nitty grittiness that I personally should not be talking about as a counselor instead of like a brain scientist,
Hmm.
neuroscientist.
Right.
But to keep it very general, and this is kind of how I phrased it in my article, I think it's really important for couples to know that when you first begin a relationship, you have a lot of neurochemicals and things happening in your body and in your brain to help you out. It almost provides a cushion or like a net of safety over your budding relationship, right? When it's still a delicate plant, we get increases in dopamine, which are like happy chemicals, and
Hmm.
testosterone, which brings that sense of excitement and newness, and kind of that sense of, I'm falling in love with this person. and it's exciting and it's good. It hits every couple differently. That's a really normal, good part of the relationship that a lot of couples experience early on in the dating process. But then the important part is that's going to fade. And it's a good thing and a healthy thing for those wild highs to kind of dissipate. And it's different for every couple, but within the realm of normal would be 6 months to maybe 2-3 years into the relationship is normally when we see that cushion dissipating. And when that happens, it would be really normal for a couple to kind of sit back and think, what happened? Did I fall out of love with this person? It can cause them to doubt themselves, the relationship, and wonder just, oh man, what do we even have here? Because I used to know without a shadow of a doubt that I loved you. And now I don't feel anything. And I think an additional note I will say is we transition from that kind of neurochemical enhanced high of falling in love into this really special part of the relationship that's more stable and steady. And it can be really healthy and really good, but it's so soft and in the background that we don't notice it's there unless we're really looking for it. So to summarize, it starts off, it really helps, right? Our brains help us fall in love with somebody, but then it fades just naturally and it's healthy and normal.
Yeah, and I appreciate you normalizing that. But so what if a couple they're viewing each other as a roommate? You mentioned things like to look for the effects or the causes rather, like busyness, conflict. Can you talk to us a little bit more about those things?
Yes. So every couple's journey into this kind of roommate status can look different. But some of the themes that I've noticed in my office would be one, busyness, right? Life happens. And we don't have as much intentional time that just kind of magically happens once we hit real life, right? Kids come, our careers start picking up, and we get so busy that sometimes just that relationship piece, all those times we had to intentionally connect, that seemed really easy and natural before.
Right.
Now they get really hard and it takes time to schedule it in, and we just lose some of that intentionality. And like I said, it becomes difficult when we get so busy and there's so many other competing priorities. So that would be one piece, just the busyness. The second piece would be conflict. And I think we see pretty commonly either too much or too little. And what I mean by that is, again, when two people really don't have that really big cushion of that falling in love feeling, it's almost like the blinds are ripped off our eyes, and here we are really experiencing this person, flaws and all. And that's when the conflict starts settling in. And it really depends on the couple, but what tools do we have available? Are we getting into conflict all the time and it's getting unmanageable and it escalates, and so we kind of just give up, right? It's hard to connect when we're fighting all the time, right? It's hard to feel that sense of emotional connection and safety when it feels like we can't even start a normal conversation. And then this other piece, which would be almost too little. Do we avoid conflict? And does a bunch of stuff just get swept under the rug until pretty soon there's just this massive mound, right? That's not being dealt with. That will also lead to a lack of emotional connection. So busyness, conflict. And then another area that I see really commonly would be wounds that never heal, or maybe only partially heal. You look back on your relationship, and this is something I encourage all of my couples to do. Really reflect on those pivotal moments where maybe you felt really hurt in a conflict or in a situation, or you felt like your partner wasn't able to be there for you in the way that you needed. Those impact the relationship for years, right? And if they never go back and get fully healed, it's going to prevent us from being able to fully connect with our partner moving forward. And when we have a pile up of those, or if they're just massive wounds that, like I said, have never gotten healed, that's going to be a pretty major barrier.
Yeah, that's good. That's really helpful too. So As we look at this and we see, maybe there are people who view their spouse as roommates. What are some practical tips to couples who are living as roommates and they want to kind of reconnect emotionally?
Yeah. Well, my first tip is to take care of yourself because you're in for a wild ride.
Amen.
It takes time to get to the place where we feel like roommates, and it takes a lot of time and energy and effort and courage to kind of get unstuck from that place. So my very first encouragement is take care of yourself, right? Because it's going to take a lot out of you and it's going to be really hard. Um,
Mhm.
and so when I say take care of yourself, and I'm thinking like physically,
Right.
are we sleeping? Are we eating well? Are we resting? Emotionally, relationally? Like, do you have a support system? Do you have anyone in your life who you can go to and you know that they are there for you
Hmm.
and they're for your relationship, right? Almost like that, just that sense of support, because things are going to get hard. Right? And so if you have that person, and normally I recommend someone who's of the same sex as you, right? So women, do you have
Mhm.
a woman you can go to? Men, do you have a man you can go to for that sense of support? And then also spiritually, right? If you are a Christian, like, are you plugged in, right? Do you have other outlets to really get encouragement, support, to grow spiritually? Because all of those pieces are going to help you have the perseverance and the stamina to continue into this process.
Mhm.
That's going to be first and foremost is
Yeah.
self. And then throughout my article, I do sprinkle quite a few things.
Mhm.
But the first ones that come to mind would be trying something old and trying something new. So when I say try something old, this is something that you can decide with your partner, but essentially looking back on your relationship, maybe what's something that you guys used to enjoy together? Or where did you first meet? And revisit that place, that park, that college campus, that restaurant you used to eat at. Do things that you used to enjoy and see what it feels like, right? We change throughout the course of our relationship, of course, and sometimes
Mhm.
it's hard for the relationship to keep up. So taking the intentional time to say, let's go revisit something that we used to enjoy and see how it feels. Do we still like it? Do we actually hate it now? And what does it just feel like to be back in this old setting? Sometimes that can be an easy way, kind of ease into something a little bit more emotionally connected.
Mhm.
So something new really feeds into almost like that adrenaline center, right? Like, let's build something new together and see what happens. And this can get pretty sloppy. But is there
Mhm.
food we've never tried? I'm not suggesting skydiving, but that would definitely be a thrill to try together. Like, is there something that we can try together that's new, fresh, exciting? And then we get to share in what was that like for us.
Mhm.
Um, so those are the first two that come to mind.
Yeah. And Daniel, this is very helpful because I don't view my spouse as a roommate, and I certainly don't think she views me one as one. But even still, like these are great preventative things to do for couples who've been married because we'll be celebrating 18 years in just a few weeks. So like, I know, really, 18 years. But these practical steps that you gave. They're super helpful to take those preventative measures so that maybe down the road this never happens, right? Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. And I'm glad that you brought that up because these are not just, like you said, for couples who are already in this place of really
Right.
struggling, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, these are things that we should be thinking about doing before we get to that point. Or when we notice just some signs like, we've been really busy recently. It feels like I haven't connected with my spouse for a little bit. What can we
Hmm.
do to just bring a little bit more intentionality in and make sure that, things are still good?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I thought it was very helpful. What's the final piece of advice that you would give to couples who are watching this or listening to it on the podcast?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, like I said earlier, this is not easy to do. It's hard
Hmm.
And depending on where you're at in this process, it almost takes a bunch of vulnerability, right? And bravery, because stepping out and really initiating some of these conversations, heart to hearts, if it's not something that we've done recently, or if there have been wounds that haven't been healed, that can feel so scary, right? And it's really, really normal for it to be a sloppy hot mess, right? When we first start this out. And as we're trying new things, it can be really easy to feel discouraged and disappointed. And so my encouragement would be, if that happens, if you feel like, oh, I made an attempt and it just blew up. I accidentally stepped on a mine and now everything is worse, or things exploded, we got into bad conflict. First of all, I do want to say yes, right? That makes sense. You're stepping out and you're changing the way things were, and that is going to create a ruckus. But second, this is what counselors are here for, right? It's not to be a permanent crutch for you or something like that. It's really just to come in, help you get unstuck, and then let you go on your merry way and enjoy, right? Enjoy this new stage in your relationship. And so that would be my encouragement, is go for it, try some new things, but also if it blows up, reach out, right? You're not alone in this, and it would be really normal for it to get sloppy.
Yeah. Well, Danielle, your article is very, very helpful, especially not just for people who, maybe view their spouse as roommates, but for those of us who have, been in our relationship for quite a while. So this article is going to be in the show notes below. I want to encourage you to go check it out. And thank you, Danielle, for writing the article. We'll be looking for part 2 pretty soon, right?
Yes, 100%.
Okay, good. Good. Well, I'm going to transition into a segment that we do here at MCO, where we look at trending topics, things you're probably seeing on social media. This was one that's been trending for quite some time, actually. We're going to talk a little bit about the Enneagram, but we're going to talk about it in terms of relationship. So, Danielle, I want to hear from you as the clinician. Can we talk about Enneagrams in relationships? But before we do that, describe to us, what is the Enneagram?
That is a great question. And this has been a trending topic. I feel like over the last couple of years, more and more people will quickly identify themselves just based on their Enneagram number.
Exactly.
I'm a 2, I'm a 4. So again, I would not be what I would call a self-proclaimed expert on the Enneagram. So I apologize in advance if I step on any toes. But generally speaking, when you look up, right, the Enneagram, what you'll normally see would be a circle with numbers around the outside, 1 through 9, with a bunch of lines interconnecting them, and it looks like a weird, tricked out star. And from that, right, I guess in simplest terms, the Enneagram is a personality test that you would take, or you would read different descriptions of all the different numbers, and you would kind of type yourself or be typed. You have a number associated with you, right? You are a 1 or a 3 or a 6. And each number has its own personality characteristics, weaknesses, strengths, ways they do best in a relationship. And the interesting thing about the Enneagram is it can be as shallow or as simple, like as you want it to be. You can just take a quick free online test and enjoy your results. Or you can take it real deep. There have been so many books published about it. So if you really want to dive in, you can dive in as deeply as you want to and really get into it. So that would maybe be my very short general description of what is the Enneagram.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So what are some of the benefits of knowing your Enneagram number and your spouse's Enneagram number?
Yeah. So for me, when I'm thinking about this, and this is something my husband and I actually did, is we listened to an audiobook and we figured out what our numbers were and we compared them. And I think one of the main benefits is it can build your compassion for your spouse, right? In every relationship, there are those things that your spouse does, or ways they respond, or things that you do that can be seen as very obnoxious or annoying, or why do they do conflict this way? Or why do they do this that way? And the beautiful thing about anything really like the Enneagram is it gives you this really neat category where the next time they do that annoying thing, oftentimes you have this extra compassion because you can say, oh, they're doing that because that's what twos do.
Mm.
It's not intentionally to annoy me. It's just a part of who they are. And it's not an attempt to hurt me or be difficult. And I think that's probably one of the main pros that I see pretty regularly is it builds in that sense of compassion. And having that experience of going through a book or doing the quiz together and discussing your results can also be really fun and connective.
Yeah.
Feels pretty safe. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. I was going to say, like, it seems like a lot of personality tests can really kind of help each partner grow together in their relationship, right? And that's kind of what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it can also be helpful, even practically speaking, because a lot of the books even will say, like, in relationship, this is how you can connect better with this type or this personality. And like, even on that level, it can be really easy for couples to, oh, here's almost a list of things. Would this be helpful if I tried to put these into practice?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Danielle. That was very helpful. So I want to transition to our last segment of our episode today, and that's our Q&A. And here at MyCounselor.Online, we love to answer your questions that you submit to us. And I've got a few questions we're going to ask you, Danielle, so I hope you're ready for them. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody listening or watching that if you have a question, we would love to answer it in a future episode. You can go online at MyCounselor.Online/ask and submit your question, and you won't have to worry about a name being mentioned. You just drop your question and we'll answer it as the best as we can. So I'm going to get into our first question for you, Danielle. The first question is, people say it's harmful to tell others that a traumatic experience of theirs is part of God's plan. So how true is that?
Stepping on toes.
Yeah.
So when I hear the question, my mind is immediately split into a few different directions. And again, I want to be careful, but here's what my gut says, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Part of me wants to talk about almost like the theology behind suffering and pain. I'm not going to go that direction. I really want to focus on why would that be problematic, right? What might that person who's suffering or who's been through a traumatic experience not receive that really well? And here's where I'll go with that. When someone is suffering, when they're going through something traumatic in any way, they're not in a place where they can think through things the same way that they would if they weren't going through those experiences, right? We tend to not be our best, thoughtful, cognitive selves when we are struggling and when we're in the pits. Right? So if I'm someone who's seeking to support, I think that's the first thing I need to keep in mind is this person is suffering, and that changes how I approach them. And it also lets me know that I need to be gentle and careful in what I'm saying. So the second piece, if I am saying your suffering or this experience is part of God's plan, right? I hear that, and there's a part of me that says, yeah, that would be helpful, right? Because it seems like the motivation behind that is, this feels out of control. We don't know why this happened, but we can rest in the idea that God is ultimately in control, and he's going to take this and do something wonderful with it, or it's going to build these character qualities, right? But potential problems, right, which is what we're going to focus on in this. If it can also, you don't know how it's going to be received, right? Based on that person's experience. So one of the first images that comes to mind, things that I've heard from clients and people who are suffering, is when they hear your suffering or your experience part of God's plan, they can think, right? Oh, so you mean when I was suffering, when I was going through this really painful experience and I was begging God to come save me, get me out of it, to be there with me, you're saying he was there and he was saying, no, right? You're just in it and I'm not going to rescue you. And as I say that, if there's a part of you that's saying that doesn't fit with how we view God, that doesn't sound like the God who draws near to the brokenhearted, right? Who would send him like from God to humanity, encounter suffering himself, right? Take all of that on him, weep when his friend dies, right? If that doesn't fit with that, you're absolutely right, right? But I would say that's one of the primary barriers, is you don't know how it's going to be received. And so anytime you're saying something like that, I think the sentiment, the motivation behind it can be so pure and so helpful, but it's too simple. It's simplistic to say this is part of God's plan, because there are a lot of different factors here and you don't know exactly where this other person is at. So that's kind of my gut.
Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, while God is, like you mentioned, in control of all things, maybe the person, and that is comforting. That's very comforting, but maybe the person just needs somebody to listen if they are going through that trauma. That's kind of what I think you were saying a while ago, like how, when somebody's going through trauma, what do they need in the moment? And just from what I found, they don't need me to give them a theology lesson.
Right.
They may just need me to grieve with them, or possibly just be an ear for them. So yeah, thank you, Danielle, for and that was a loaded question. I'm sure there are so many other pieces to it that I would have loved to hear more from the questioner, right? So we're going to move on to our next question, our last question for today's episode. And it says this: I need help with sexual bereavement. My wife's terminal illness has ended intimacy for us. I'm grieving. What should I do? Yeah, a heavy question.
Yeah, very heavy. But also, I mean, the first thing, right? There's almost a part of me that's so glad that this question was asked, because this is normal, right? Doesn't take away the hardness, but I'm so glad it's being asked, because it's not something we talk about. In fact, recent research is saying this is really normal, and why aren't we talking about this more? Because at some point, we're all going to encounter that end to sexual intimacy. And in this case, the grief of the terminal illness on top of I'm losing my partner. And there's also, I'm going to be missing out on this physical piece. And the sexual intimacy piece is so important in the marriage. It helps us remain connected. And so to lose, it's massive, right? So the first thing I want to say is you are not alone. And I'm so proud of whoever asked this for even bringing it to the table. As far as where do we go from here, I think there are no easy answers, but I think we treat it like grief, which is we are made to best grieve in community with other people. And that's part of the complicated nature of this is not normal table topic, right? Talking about the sadness and the pain that comes with I've lost my wife or my husband, and I've also lost my sexual relationship and that bond and that sense of connection with this person. And so, like I said, it's becoming more and more normal to talk about, but I would reach out to somebody, right? As much as possible. This is a lonely place to be. It's a hard place to be. And I would start with, are there grief support groups? If there's somebody in your life that has gone through something similar, who you can say this to and they'll say, yes, I understand. That's option number one, right? Is there someone you know in your life, in your church, in your community, they've suffered a loss? And so maybe they can connect with me over this. And then, like I said, any grief support groups, those are going to be major as well. Like specifically, terminal illness groups as well. You want to be with people who will be able to meet you with compassion, empathy, and not a sense of judgment or like a wall that says, oof, don't talk to me about that.
Yeah.
Okay. And if there are not those people available, obviously my hope would be that you would have a wise, trusted friend who could just be with you in it. Again, reach out to someone who can help you navigate this uncharted territory, because it's incredibly lonely and scary. It's almost like you're a ship alone in the middle of the sea and you don't know which direction to go. And so this would also be a really good time to reach out to someone who's trained to help navigate those waters.
Yeah, that's good. I'm glad you mentioned that about like not just look for a grief support group, and I'm glad you mentioned that, but what to look for in that grief support group. And I'm glad you listed out some of those things. That's very helpful. Any other thoughts on that?
I think once again, just saying it would be really normal to have a lot of questions and even practical concerns.
Right.
And to seek help when you can seek help, and to be really brave, because it's going to take courage. Nobody wants to be that vulnerable and feel that exposed.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Danielle. It's been a joy having you on our episode today. I know our viewers and listeners have had a lot of things to take away with on today's episode. And I want to thank you guys for watching or listening. And again, thank you, Danielle, for coming on to today's show and sharing your insight with us. It's been great having you on the show.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Good. Again, if you have questions, we would love to answer them in future episodes. Please go to MyCounselor.Online/ask, and we will answer them in future episodes. Also, just want to let you know real quick about our social media. We are on Instagram, we're on Facebook, and we have the handle of Love My Counselor. You can also go find us on YouTube at MyCounselor.Online Christian Counseling. Hey, do us a favor and go like and share some of our content and get it out there with your friends, because MyCounselor.Online has tons of resources, tons of encouragement stuff out there, and our world could use some encouragement today. So help us out and like our page and subscribe to our page. And today's been a wonderful episode. Thank you again, Danielle, for joining us, and thank you again for watching or listening. We'll see you again next week for another episode of My Counselor Online.